the present time, I'm setting up my own research lab at Curtin University in Perth, and tentatively titled Alternate Anatomies. So effectively we're going to be interrogating the aesthetics, the ethics, the engineering of bodies, machines and virtual systems. Well, I've known Julian Goddard for a number of years now, and he's presently head of the School of Design and Art at Curtin. And in fact, Julian was the person who originally arranged my residency at Curtin it was 1997. And that was in fact where we first imaged the extra ear project. But at that time, it was an ear on the side of my head. And so we've kept in touch, and about a year and a half ago, Julian floated the idea of the possibility of this distinguished research fellow position at the university, and it took a while to kind of go through HR and all the admin hoops, but from about August this year, I got that position, and it's going to be a lab where we have two research fellows connected. So two people will be involved in doing related research, and we've got a state-of-the-art 3D printer, several portable scanners, 6K video equipment, so we'll be able to document in the best possible quality the research outcomes that happen out of this lab. Well, we're still completing the Ambidextrous Arm project, which will be in collaboration with Melbourne Now University. So that's where the project was kick-started. And at the moment we have the first prototype, and we've begun to do some testing of the fingers, the ambidextrous fingers. So effectively, the ambidextrous arm is a soft arm using pneumatic rubber muscle actuators, and the fingers can bend in one direction, for example, for a right hand, but they can completely bend in the other direction for a left hand. So you've got a universal human manipulator, which is left-handed and right-handed all in the one design, with the thumb rotating one way and then the other way. And the interesting thing here will be not only in constructing or engineering a multi-handed prosthesis, but also a prosthesis that might, coupled to the human subject, might be able to manage phantom limb pain. Well, aside from the performative possibilities, which will be really interesting, there are, these possible sort of research outcomes. But for example, imagine a hand that could also see, with either a webcam in its palm or a camera in the tip of the finger. Then this ambidextrous arm will also be a seeing arm, and we're also planning to have some haptics. There'll be some force feedback and possible tactile feedback. So as well as an ambidextrous arm, with all of these additional capabilities, it'll become a somewhat intelligent arm as well, a seeing arm, a predictive arm, an arm that will kind of predict what the user is trying to do and complete the action without the human subject necessarily having to especially command it. Well, initially, of course, there's only one ambidextrous arm, and that's at Brunel. But what I'm planning to do, for example, at Curtin, is to engineer articulated orthosis for my two hands. So, for example, if I wanted to control the left-handed movements of the remote arm, I would simply do that. If I wanted to control the right-handed movements of the remotely positioned ambidextrous arm, I would use my right. So you would need two hands to remotely control an ambidextrous arm. But again, performatively, that would be really interesting. But there would also be sort of therapeutic uses in addition to the possible management of phantom limb pain. So there's lots of sort of engineering, lots of research directions this particular ambidextrous arm platform might result in. Well, I've had an idea of an ambidextrous hand for a long time, and I did my own little experiments in articulating a finger to bend in both directions. Basically, it's sort of a small pulley and cable structure at each joint, driven by an actuator in the forearm. Actually, not dissimilar to our arm, right? Tendons in the fingers are pulled by muscles in the forearm. So it's a very anatomically kind of designed arm. But the experiments I did before were with motors, so reversible motors. But I wasn't really satisfied with that idea, and when in recent years the possibility of using pneumatic rubber muscles came about, then the idea became more concrete, and then actually designing the jointed fingers became possible with the involvement of a group of mechanical engineering students and a couple of PhD students at Brunel. Well, I don't think you can sort of wait for the sophisticated technology to be developed. I mean, if that was the case, I would have waited another 10, 20 years for my ear-on-arm project, but of course, not only don't I have that time physiologically, I mean, it's unpredictable really where the developments in the technology will occur anyway. So you do the best you can with the state of technology that exists. But having said that, some ideas, originate 3, 4, 10 years before they're actualized. And the reason for that is sometimes the technology doesn't really exist yet for you to fully realize those projects. So the idea of the walking exoskeleton project was 3, 4, 5 years before it actually happened. The extra ear project took 10 years before I found sort of 3 surgeons and got the funding to begin it. Yes, now, for example, if I was to re-engineer my third hand, which was completed in 1980, instead of having tactile sensors just at the fingertips, now you can have a skin that has embedded tactile feedback sensors. So the whole kind of artificial skin becomes a sensor. So yes, you would make projects differently now that were completed 20, 30 years ago, 40 years ago. On the other hand, you don't simply wait around until somehow the technology develops, otherwise you really wouldn't be doing much. I think artists and technologies can be coupled and often are coupled in the production of new artworks. On the other hand, sometimes it's very difficult to determine which caused what. Sometimes the idea results in developing the technology. At other times, the technology suggests a possible outcome that was not plausible before that technology was developed. So you can be coupled, but not necessarily be able to determine which caused the other, which was causal. Well, for example, I mean, to be even more specific, in the mid 80s, I was doing performances actuating a virtual body using Polymus position orientation sensors that involved, using Onyx computers and being heavily wired together. But now you can do this completely wirelessly, either using a Connect sensor or using wireless technology stuck on your skin. So yes, some of these things occurred a lot earlier, but are only recently better realised, without having to be tethered to all the technology. The West-based performance was for a series of music events, actually, titled More Talk, Less Action, and my participation was in the last of these in a series of 6. And firstly, there was very little time to set up and test the performance. In fact, there was literally only a couple of hours to do that. Also, there was no budget. The organisers tried to get funding from the Australia Council and were unsuccessful. So we had to do a performance that was not too complex technologically, that didn't cost anything, and that took a minimum of time to set up. And leading up to this event, I was working with several other assistants in developing a Second Life installation of 3 of my avatar clones, which effectively were automatons in this installation, that were choreographed to move in and out of each other's bodies. One was skinned as a skeleton, one was skinned as a musculature, and the other was skinned to look like my avatar with a mechanical arm attached and with a beating heart visible on its chest, right? So this sort of choreography of these 3 automatons also had sounds mapped to the animations. So as these automatons moved in and out of each other, as they broke apart, as they were scripted into different animations, there were different sounds mapped to it. So it was a kind of an interesting acoustical interplay that could provide a projected backdrop to my body standing in front of the screen, imaging Second Life, and my 4th avatar was performing live in Second Life with an animation that mimicked the movements of my right arm, which was in fact muscle stimulated. 4-channel stimulation system that I wore on my body, and that choreographed the movements of my right arm, which were involuntary, and my avatar mimicked these movements. So there was a sort of a visual connection between the physical body's movements and the avatar in Second Life. And so if you can imagine the 3 automatons and my avatar interacting in Second Life, live in Second Life, generating this cacophony of sound, and my body physically standing in front of the screen, my right arm involuntarily moving, but also with a theremin app on my iPhone generating sounds that indicated and registered the position and movements of my arm. So that was the aesthetic parameters of that performance. It was really a choreography of scripted movements and mapped sounds, which also featured my brain waves and heartbeat, and some other acoustical analog sounds that I chose to use, including white noise. Look, the performance that I'd like to realise, but to realise it in a reasonably sophisticated way, is this idea of the body's sensory apparatus experiencing in a very distributed and fragmentary way what other people sense and feel in other places. So this idea that my eyes would be seeing with the eyes of someone in London, my ears would be hearing with someone's ears in New York, whilst my left arm, for example, is remotely controlled by someone from Tokyo, whilst I'm tweeting friends with my right hand, from Melbourne. That's a performance that I would really like to set up, but we would really need to engineer a HUD and an exoskeleton that would make this performance interesting in terms of its interface and engineering.
Right, so it wouldn't be possible with current, Google Glass clones, or perhaps Google Glass when it comes out?
Well, you could use some present HUD displays, 3D goggles or video goggles, or Google Glass, but I think you have to imagine this system as especially designed for this performance. And also, if my ambidextrous arm is involved, you would have a camera at its fingertip or in the palm of its hand. So imagine what would be happening there would be you would be dislocating your eye from your head to your hand. So it wouldn't be a matter of eye-hand coordination. It would be a matter really of disrupting that normal relationship you would have. You would have your eye in your hand, so eye-hand coordination would take on some kind of new meaning.
Wow.
I mean, that's it's only a kind of a small dislocation, but just imagine your experience of the world if your eye is not fixed on your face, but is a mobile eye on the end of a finger or a hand. And imagine if you had one eye having this input, whilst the other eye stays fixed and superimposes the world as you would normally see it. So messing with these different bits of your anatomy, whether it's an ear on your arm or an eye in your hand, these are the sorts of activities that the Alternate Anatomies Lab will be interested in doing. The other thing that we're trying to realise is we're trying to facilitate a project from a Mexican artist who, in a conversation we had in Mexico City, came up with the idea of an e-tail, an electronic tail. It's a kind of retro engineering of a tail for a human body. So imagine all the different functions a tail might have, you know. It could become the third tripod leg to stabilise your bipedal body. It could be a way of generating additional gestures which might indicate affect, like some animals use their tails for. It might be a tail that can wrap around something. In other words, the tail becomes a manipulator. It also might have a camera at the end of its tail. So imagine this sort of accessory to your anatomy that would need to be engineered. There's some interesting engineering problems, you know. When this tail isn't being used, it can't just hang there, it gets in the way. It has to roll up out of the way, or it might curl up around your neck as some kind of visual accessory. But there's lots of interesting questions about engineering such a tail, and in terms of comparative anatomy, sort of discerning what the tails of insects and animals do, what uses they have, and their multiplicity of uses. So if we can incorporate some of the more interesting insect and animal capabilities of tails for an accessory to our anatomy, then it generates a very interesting project. So, but to do this, we need some additional funding. We need to get the Mexican artist to come to Perth, to Curtin. But anyway, I think that's an exciting possibility. Well, I think that observation of augmenting the body or experimenting with alternate human anatomies, not necessarily by constructing new augmentations as such, but perhaps redeveloping, redesigning, reconfiguring anatomies that have evolved before us and still exist in insects and animals. So I think that is an important aspect of what we're doing. And it's kind of part of this direction in robotics of biomimicry, that by studying insects and animals, one can extract and develop different engineering possibilities. See, once you translate the bio-inspired functions and the bio-inspired capabilities and translate them into metal and silicon chip circuitry, you do unexpectedly engineer new sorts of directions and new unexpected operations. So it's not simply a matter of mimicking something that already exists in nature, but being inspired by those alternate anatomies that have occurred in evolution and development. You translate them into something other, and it's that other that is interesting. Although sometimes it might have a retro feel about it. I think the problems with artistic collaborations with other artists, they're difficult because everyone has their own agenda, everyone has their own aesthetic and particular interests. Certainly you require some collaboration and some technical assistance in realising a performance, but sometimes it's unrealistic unless everyone has a particularly defined role. So in the past, for example, collaborations can work. But generally, if each artist has a very clearly defined role, and often in a different related art. So for example, if John Cage does the sound for Merce Cunningham, neither feels compromised or challenged by the other's aesthetic, and one's doing sound and one's doing the visuals. So I think in that sort of circumstance, collaborations more easily occur. At the present time, there's an installation of mine as part of Melbourne Now at the Ian Potter NGV. It's effectively the three life casts of the ear on arm. One's in glass, one's in aluminium, one's in bronze, and that installation is in front of the large print of the ear on arm. So I've been asked to do an artist talk and discussing the project for visitors to the gallery. Nothing really exciting, but hopefully the audience will be a new one and one that perhaps isn't very familiar with the conceptual underpinnings of that ear on arm project. In Gdansk, in May of this coming year, 2014, there is a large exhibition of robotics, and my work will be largely featured in that exhibition. The exoskeleton robot, the walking head robot, my extended arm, my third hand will be on show there, as well as the prosthetic head installation. So it kind of becomes a mini retrospective of a lot of the work done in the last sort of 10-15 years. So hopefully that will generate other possible performances and exhibitions elsewhere. Well, I think Rodney Brooks's work on insect-like robots, on constructing robot behaviour bottom up. I mean, his early insect robots really didn't have brains as such, you know, they were hardwired with sensors, and effectively the interesting behaviour of the robot was really an expression of the complexity of the environment that they had to navigate, that they had to inhabit. But of course, in recent years, Rodney has been more interested in human-like robots, and I met with him and had a chat to him at the recent Humanoid Robotics symposium in Atlanta several months ago. And so it was interesting to sort of see that transition from his early sort of biomimicked insect-like robots to more of an interest now in human-like robots. I guess with the realization that increasingly now we have to more socially interact with intelligent machines, intelligent robots, not only because of the fact that it's an aging society, but also because robots now are going to become more autonomous and intelligent, and there's many reasons why these intelligent and autonomous robots might look like us. Partly because this makes for a more comfortable interaction. We're used to interacting with other bodies, with faces that generate emotions and facial expressions and speak in natural languages. So if robots can do that, it'll be more comfortable to interact with them. And also, of course, these robots have to inhabit the same social spaces as we do. So humanoid robots that can walk through doorways, that can inhabit the same architectural spaces, that makes sense as well. So it's not just purely for cosmetic reasons that robots might be humanoid, but rather that there are already hardwired sort of responses that we would be able to exchange with a human-like robot that makes for a more collaborative and communicative exchange. Well, I think that idea that machines, robots, drones can be largely autonomous or semi-autonomous, but at certain times be remotely directed by humans or taken over by human agency. I think having both of those capabilities makes sense. I mean, very much like our bodies, that our bodies largely operate automatically, habitually. But every now and again we have to direct our attention and we have to perform a particular task, and our conscious agency takes over. So really that's what would be happening, but now seeing the robot as an end effector of the human body. So if the robot can be simultaneously autonomous, but also be an end effector of the body, so at certain critical moments with particular operations, we might invade the agency of the robot and insert our agency into that. That makes sense. The other thing, though, with drones are that drones have recently become, micro-miniaturized. So whereas in the past drones essentially kept places under surveillance, now micro-drones can keep particular people under surveillance. So imagine a micro-drone of mosquito size or mosquito scale. Not only might that keep one person under surveillance, but it also might take a blood sample from that particular person while they're asleep. In other words, take a DNA sample, or more maliciously, a micro mosquito-like drone might also have the capabilities of injecting some lethal medication. So now the ability of micro drones extends beyond places and can focus on particular people. Now this complicates both the ethics and also the military capabilities.
Are you worried that you're being watched?
Well, of course, the problem with any drone, any surveillance drone, or in fact with any laptop that has a webcam embedded in it, is that if someone can hack your laptop, they can also access your laptop camera. If someone can hack a drone and take it over, they can also hack the drone's vision. So it gets very complicated when neither you nor the drone are in control, but someone other, some hacker. So again, it generates all sorts of interesting possibilities, but it also complicates the ethical and malicious possibilities of drones and any computational device for that matter.
It's interesting. I think I've spoken to you before about the idea of a participatory panopticon where little brothers and sisters are watching each other. In some ways it could be good, in some ways, to make sure that if somebody's doing something malicious, there may be more than one viewpoint of what they're doing, so it becomes very hard to hide things. But then again, our privacy is invaded as well.
Well, that is the redeeming feature of a participatory panopticon, in that the system becomes so complex and the feedback loops so extended that if everyone is watching everyone else, perhaps there are certain disincentives to do something malicious or to do something hidden. So the sort of checks and balances with technology, it's like we always imagine that the problems of computation, or one real problem with computation, was that it would lead to kind of an Orwellian Big Brother sort of control of society. But if every individual has a laptop, if every individual has a mobile phone, then and everyone can hack everyone else, then it's much more difficult to have a central control agency. You're going to have a proliferating multi-participatory system where checks and balances multiply. Well, of course, there is a real interest in swarm robot architectures, partly because aesthetically you can generate rhythms and interactions and collaborations that you can't achieve with one single robot. So a multiplicity of micro robots performing swarm-like certainly conjure up all kinds of artistic directions. And I've already spoken to a roboticist in Karlsruhe who's particularly interested in swarms and was perhaps willing, or certainly willing to collaborate on a project. I mean, certainly the idea of micro-miniaturized, or better still, nano-sized machines sensors or even robots inhabiting the human body is something that there's always been an interest in, especially for medical monitoring of a body that is largely poorly designed to detect consciously what's happening at a cellular level. So incorporating those sorts of hybrid nano chassis with bacteria that propel them inside the body, that's certainly possible, and artistically it might generate more possibilities of inserting artworks into not only the empty spaces of the body but also into its circulatory system. Well, that kind of online affect would be an outcome of the performance that I've described, where I might be seeing with the eyes of someone, hearing with the eyes of someone else, someone other being a part of my agency and remotely actuating my arm. Certainly that generates a kind of an empathy that you would not have just being a single agent using a single body sensory apparatus. But of course, affect is also something that's projected because of an awareness that certain gestures, certain facial expressions indicate a certain disposition of that other person. What I'm really describing, though, is a more fragmentary and distributed sensory experience where you're not dependent on a single body or a single other. I suspect that affect in being distributed amongst a multiplicity of people might be less of an issue and might be more problematic as an expectation. What's meant is that because this body's sensory experience is a distributed one from remote people in other places, that the experience is more one of information rather than affect. So in a sense, through a multiplicity and a multi-agental experience, and because you're not encased in one particular body, your emotional expression is going to be much more dissipated and disseminated, and I think emotion becomes less of an issue. Well, I think if we're increasingly connected, communication and collaboration becomes much more intricate, and the realm of aesthetics, but as well the realm of ethics, becomes more problematic. So there are all sorts of possibilities that can result from these more intimate interfaces. But these have to be managed, negotiated, as well as simplistically experienced.
Thanks very much.
A pleasure as always.